Look at the vaccines on the schedule for kids. Very few, almost none, were ever studied before they were hit the market with a true placebo. When you go look at the trials, they were placebo studied, but the placebo was a vaccine. Placebo was another vaccine. The placebo was a vaccine minus the antigen. So when somebody says, oh, they've all been placebo studied, yes, they have. But the placebo isn't what you think the placebo was. Really those vaccines, Hep B and polio and measles, they were studied against earlier versions of the vaccines. The first studies in general were not against placebos because that, let's say the DTaP vaccine, that was like 100 years ago. So it was like 75. So they didn't study things that way that they maybe took a bunch of siblings or they took a group of 20 people and just gave them a vaccine and saw if they had more or less symptoms.
Do you see the risks of these different categories of vaccines to be different from each other, or are they pretty much in the same bucket of risk to our children?
I think the big question that we still have to answer is the long-term risks. And I don't think we have any clue on that. We really don't know.
Okay, Dr. Warsh, thank you so much for coming on Extend. I love it that you're here.
Thank you for having me here. I'm excited to chat.
Yeah, I'm really was looking forward to this conversation because you're out there talking about things that were previously you couldn't talk about.
Definitely. I didn't talk about it. Obviously in the office I talked about vaccines, but it was so censored for so long and I got so frustrated by it. And thankfully things have changed. And so I came out with a book and I've been talking about it more and more because I think it's really important. I don't want people to fight or argue, but I think we should be able to talk about things, especially because so many parents have questions.
Right, absolutely. And parents have so many questions right now. You're a pediatrician. You've also been trained in functional medicine as you're an integrative pediatrician, which is a rare breed right now. And I would love to just start there with your story a little bit. How did you make the decision to learn about more functional medicine and root cause medicine and tie that to pediatrics?
Really, for me, so I feel like a lot of people go into integrative medicine because they have some sort of health issue and the medical system doesn't address that, and so they go outside of it. Yeah. For me, it wasn't that way. Luckily, knock on wood, I've been pretty healthy. But I met my wife during residency, during training, and she was very holistic minded. She always grew up that way, and so it really opened up my eyes to another world. And also just seeing patients getting sicker and sicker, and not really having good answers for that, and sometimes seeing people go outside of the system and getting better. And I was like, what is that? Like, what? Why are people getting better? And so I started taking classes and courses in functional medicine and integrative medicine just on the side. And as soon as you do that, you're like, whoa, why weren't we taught any of this? It's so basic common sense. But when you're going through residency and training and you're in the medical system, and I was in like the middle, like I was at Children's Hospital Los Angeles. That's as Western as you can get. It's a great program, but you don't really hear about any of this stuff except it being woo-woo or out there. And then you go to a functional medicine and they're talking about root cause. And you're like, why am I not thinking about this? Of course I should be thinking this way. This isn't weird at all. They're talking about diet and sleep and exercise. Of course those things matter. And I've never heard that once in all the training. And so for me, I'm not against Western medicine. I think we have amazing medications that could save your life, but there's so much more to health, and we just don't talk about it. And so I just try to integrate those two things in my practice, and that's why I've been speaking about that and talking about it, because I think it's really important.
Yeah, it's so important. I love your story. And, to be clear, like your wife is a lawyer. She's not even she's not a doctor. You met her in medical school, but she's a lawyer.
She's a lawyer, yeah.
Right. So you had to learn about this through your lawyer wife.
Exactly. But I mean, I think that's where we need to go, right?
Yeah.
I don't take care of, very woo-woo people. I mean, maybe some people are a little out there, but it's regular everyday people that are thinking about their health and worried about the chronic disease epidemic that is happening. We have about 50% of kids with a chronic disease. Autism,
50% of kids have a chronic disease.
About something in that range, 40, 50%. It's pretty insane. I mean,
that's insane.
Autoimmune conditions are skyrocketing. Cancer rates in kids are skyrocketing. Autism, 1 in 31 now. In California, it's 1 in 12.5 boys. 1 in 12.5. That's insane. And people want to say, oh, it's just better diagnosis. Oh, it's just that's not true. It's happening more. Yes, we're better at diagnosing things. Yes, we're more aware. But kids are much more sick. Anybody that's in the school system, anybody that works with kids sees that they are much sicker. We have type 2 diabetes. Adult onset diabetes. You're seeing it in kids now. It's literally called adult onset diabetes. So things are happening. We're seeing sicker kids.
Yeah. I mean, and coming from your perspective as a practicing pediatrician, and you're seeing this, you can attest to the fact that this is real.
It's absolutely real. And one of the reasons I went into medicine in the first place, especially working with kids, is to try to get ahead of things. And that doesn't seem to be the direction medicine's going. We're really good at treating things. We're really good at giving people a pill. But what we need to get really good at is preventing this from ever happening. And thankfully, I guess, I don't think health is political, but it has become a little bit political in the last year. I think that's good to some degree that we're at least talking about it. I hope that kind of gets pulled back over the next couple of years. It becomes a little bit more bipartisan again, but at least we're talking about it. And whether you like Secretary Kennedy or you hate him, or you agree with everything he says or you don't, I think it's at least good that we're getting some sort of shakeup in the industry right now, because I think we need to be woken up to the fact that there's a big problem going on. And before we're going to make any changes, we have to at least acknowledge that it's happening. And I still feel like in mainstream media, a lot of the discussion isn't even acknowledging the problem. It's just saying, oh, we're just better at diagnosing it. That's just not true.
No, absolutely. So, you're a lot younger than I am, and I went to medical school 30 years ago now. And you came out of training about 10 years ago, right? And so it's still a real problem that in medical school and training that we're not taught about root causes and also, lifestyle factors to the degree that we should be taught.
Yes, it's a huge problem. I don't think you realize any of this unless you get outside the system and start to learn some other things, because you only know what you know and you're taught what you're taught. And we get a lot of amazing training in identifying issues, working in an ICU, saving people's lives. Like, that stuff is great, but we really get almost no training in nutrition. Yeah, you learn about nutritional deficiencies and you learn about scurvy and things like that, but you don't learn about what somebody should eat or what you should be thinking about. And that's the same thing with vaccines, right? Yeah. It's really interesting when you step back and you think about it. And what you're taught about vaccines isn't really safety.
No.
It's, all right, here are the horrible diseases we used to have. Here's how many people used to die of these terrible diseases. We don't really see any of these diseases anymore. That's because of vaccines, these amazing products that we have. Here's your schedule. Go do it.
Yeah.
And that's what you learn. And there's no course on why not to trust Pharma 101 or here's how vaccines were studied or here's the kind of research that we don't have. It's just, these are magical products. Go give them. Here's your schedule. And we need to recognize that so we could start to teach some of these things and kind of push back. Doctors are inquisitive, but we're not really given all that information to even be inquisitive to kind of push back and make things better. And of course, we want the best possible vaccines ever. We want to always improve. We don't have the best possible vaccination program we're ever going to have in humanity. But I think that's what we kind of think. It's almost like a religion. And I really recognize that through stepping outside and writing the book and talking to people that there is a lot more that we can still do to make things even better.
Right. This is so powerful. So, let's talk a little bit about vaccines just to start and lay the groundwork for people. I have kids. I shared with you, I have an 11 and 8-year-old. They got all the vaccines, including the COVID vaccines when they were mandated to come out. And I'm a doctor. I was trained in medical school, and I was trained exactly the same way you were trained. We learned about the different types of vaccines. We learned about why everyone should have them, but nothing around where they're coming from and what to look out for and whether they're safe or not, or any N of one type of talk around who should have them, who should not have them, right? And I'd love to dive into just setting the stage around what are the different types of vaccines and what are the diseases that we're trying to protect against, and how has vaccine technology evolved since the first vaccine was developed?
Perfect. Yeah, it's a great place to start. So I think even before that, I think it's important to kind of set the stage for me. I'm not against vaccines.
Right.
We give them in the office. I just personally believe in people being able to choose what's best for them. I don't force people to do anything. We have people in the office that do the regular CDC schedule. Some people go on a slower schedule. Some people don't do it. Most people do. And that's my personal belief that I just shouldn't force people to do it. I should be giving them information, and then they should make the best decision for them, which is basically the way that I do and medicine does everything else.
Yeah.
And so I'm not against it. I just think that we need to have good discussions. And even why I wrote the book in the first place was not to convince people to do it or not to do it. It's really just I want to be able to talk about it.
Yeah.
I felt like it was so censored. And I feel like we need to have discussions like this between doctors who can have an honest debate and not say, oh, you should do it or it's the worst thing ever, it's the best thing ever. But let's just talk about the pros and the cons, the risk versus the benefits, so people can get more educated in the topic. So that's kind of the background for how I got here for this. Yeah. And I think that's important.
Can I just ask you a couple questions on that just
real
quick?
Then we can go back into your question.
Yeah, let's go back into the question after that. Because I think you touched on something really important. Most of medicine, you are giving people informed consents, even if it's for a life-saving surgery, you need to tell them the risks and the benefits and why you're doing it. You can't force it on somebody, right? There's very few things in health care in general that are forced upon people. And one of them is vaccines. Another one is perhaps, another controversial topic, which is like fluoride in the water,
Yeah.
Now, from my kind of like big picture viewpoint, putting fluoride in the water, it just prevents people from, supposedly getting cavities, right? And so this is something that what's the real benefit of doing this is very debatable, because people can prevent getting cavities by brushing their teeth, and you're exposing them to risk from the fluoride, in my opinion. However, vaccines, you're actually, it's different, right? You're protecting that person, but you're also protecting from outbreaks, right? And so it's more of a public health concern, where you are protecting someone from obviously getting the infection themselves, but also spreading it in schools or in amusement parks, for example. And so my question to you is, I understand people getting informed and being able to choose, but how do you fall on the question of if someone chooses not to do it, they might be putting other people at risk?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's something that needs to be debated more.
Yeah.
I would say, number one, many of the vaccines don't protect other people. They just protect you. Some of them definitely do protect other people, but a lot of them are just for your own protection. Like, for example, tetanus.
Right.
You're not protecting anybody else. You're not protecting from spread, whooping cough in general. You can still pass it on. Just like with coronavirus is maybe the most recent example, where originally it was kind of thought, or we were told, that it would prevent spread, but it really doesn't, because you can still be colonized. You can still pass it on. Even if you're protected, it might protect you, but doesn't necessarily protect somebody else. Maybe it protects you a little. There's a wide range.
Exactly. What about MMR, for example?
So MMR does protect other people.
Right.
So there are certain vaccines where it prevents you from getting it or prevents you from spreading it, and that's the best kind of vaccine, and that's the kind of vaccine that you ultimately would love to see them all be, but that's not the way that they all are. And so it's a debate. I think it's an important public health debate. It's called the social contract, right? Kind of what you're talking about, where we do this so we can protect somebody else. We don't want that baby who can't get a vaccine to get measles. We don't want the kid who's immunocompromised to be able to get it. So a bunch of people get it. So for measles, about 95% of people get it. It can't really spread in the community. It's very unlikely to do so. And so you're protecting other people. That is true.
Yeah.
And that is a fact. But there is a question of, well, where does that fall with my personal rights?
Right.
And where does that fall for what I choose to do for my own kids? If I feel like my kid is a very high risk to have a reaction from a vaccine, or I don't want to do the vaccine, then what are my rights as a parent to decide that I don't want to do it for them? And I think that's also valid, and it's also a reasonable discussion to have, because everyone values those things differently, and everybody has a different point where they're like, okay, I agree, I want to protect other people, but this cost is too high. Because what if you were told you had to do 50 vaccines for other people, or 100 vaccines? Or what if we came in and said, oh, well, this kid needs a kidney. Your kid has to have a surgery to protect the other kid to give them a kidney. Or what if we want you to attach your brain to this new mechanism because that's going to protect other people? I mean, obviously that's a lot more invasive and down the road. But the point is, everybody has a different point at which they feel like they should be doing something for other people. And it's not right or wrong if you decide, well, I don't feel like this vaccine is useful for my child, or I don't feel like the safety profile is good enough for my child, so I want to protect my child. I'm not thinking about the other child.
Right.
And both positions can be true, because it's not necessarily selfish of you to want to protect your own child, but it might be selfish of you not to protect another child. So I think it's a very interesting discussion, things that should be debated, because there is no simple answer. And I definitely I discuss that in the book, and I think about it in my own life, because I don't think there's an easy answer, and I don't have one, because if everybody stops getting the measles vaccine, then it does increase the risk for everybody else. But at the same time, if you don't feel like you should get it, then should you be forced to do it?
Right. And so my purpose for asking that question, Joel, is because I feel like vaccines get lumped into one big bucket together. And really, there's different vaccines, and they all have a different talk track, a different debate that we need to have about them, right? And so in my mind, there is a separation between vaccines that protect the public health and vaccines that protect the individual.
Correct. And they're not really separated in most people's minds, or even in school in California. Like you're required to get certain ones that don't necessarily protect other people.
Right.
And I think that isn't actually the correct way to think about things, because what you're saying is perfectly logical. And if you're going to say, well, these are the ones we're going to mandate for school, I would expect, I don't think they should be mandated anywhere. I think you should be given choices. But regardless, if you're going to, it should be mandated the ones that actually protect other people.
Right. Why are we mandating all of these if they're not protecting other people, right? I mean, then individual choice becomes much more relevant as well, right?
And so, I think so. And that's where the nuance comes back in. I think that's where we're failing in public health and failing in our discussions, because there isn't a lot of nuance. It's like, these are the best things ever. Everybody should go do it. It's the CDC recommended schedule. It's not the CDC required schedule. And yet it seems like we've moved much more towards required, and it's my way or the highway. Don't do it, I kick you out of the office. And especially with that really intelligent question where you're not actually protecting somebody else, then a parent has to make a decision that's right that they feel is right for their kid. And they might be wrong. Their kid might get this disease and get really sick from it, but they also might give a vaccine and their kid could have a bad reaction from it. Both things are true. And that's where choice comes in. Just like cancer. You have cancer, you have a medication for cancer, and we know that you can lose your hair. You could have your immune system destroyed and you can get really sick and die from the medication. But people get the choice, and many people choose to do it because it might save their life, and other people say, I don't want to do that. And we're okay with that.
Yeah, exactly. So back to my original question, which is take us through some of the different types of vaccines and the science and the reasoning behind them.
Yeah, so I'd say at very high level, there's the live attenuated vaccine, so something like the measles vaccine, which is the whole disease, but just attenuated so that it doesn't cause disease in you. You have the proteins of a disease, so maybe just like one little part of the disease that's going to cause stimulation. You have the new vaccines like the mRNA vaccine, so that's really using your body's own machinery to create the proteins. That way your body can react to it. So kind of high level, you have the live, you have the not live, and then you have the mRNA, or the big categories of the different vaccines.
And this is super important for people to understand, because we've had live and not live vaccines for a very long time. We've only had the mRNA vaccines for a few years now, right? And the live and the not live, they have a ton more research than the new mRNA vaccines. And I would argue that the live and the not live vaccines are using thousands and thousands of years of evolutionary biology to function, whereas the mRNA vaccines are really utilizing new technology that is being introduced at a cellular level. It's a very different conversation for both of them as far as the science goes.
Correct. So, first of all, with the mRNA technology, so there has been research on mRNA for a long time, but use in real life is obviously very different than in a lab or in an animal. And we just really started using it for COVID. So we really have no idea what it does to anybody long-term still. We know 4 or 5 years out. But even then, it's very debatable. It's maybe one of the most frustrating things that I've seen in a long time, because you have two different worlds of information out there. You have COVID is the best thing, the vaccine is the best thing ever, and it's saved millions of lives and saved trillions of dollars. And then you talk to the next person, and it's the worst thing ever, and it's killing everybody, and it's causing all sorts of problems, and we need to pull it from the market. And the average parent's like, okay, both people seem reasonable. What do I do? And what we don't see right now is debates. And I think we need that, because we have this weird back and forth in our health world where Secretary Kennedy, HHS, says one thing, and then the CDC says another thing, and then somebody else says something, and then the American Academy of Pediatrics sues them for doing the thing that they're doing. And it's like, have you guys gotten in a room and talked about this?
Yeah.
Lawsuits and this back and forth is not what works. You're supposed to get in a room, and you're supposed to have the smartest people debate these things. And I'm still not sure what we should all be believing in this world, because you have really good studies on both sides showing different things, and like, how much harm is it causing? How much good is it helping? Where is the actual science, and what should we be believing, or where do we find some middle ground here? And it's really confusing, and it's frustrating, I think, to a lot of parents.
And in your big picture, really educating, you've done a deep dive into this. How much does the financial incentives for the pharmaceutical companies and that whole kind of group of companies and people and government organizations, how much does the financial incentives play into this?
I think it's a huge part of it, because if you go back into history and you move forward, these pharmaceutical companies have been getting bigger and bigger, and they have so much money at this point that we don't even realize how their tentacles are in everything. And they fund the science, they fund the journals, they fund the medical schools, they fund the CDC and the NIH and all of these organizations. And so literally everything that we get is funded by them. It's very hard to even see a world where we're outside of that because that's just what we're taught. And the news is not going to say something bad about the people that fund their programs. So you just don't see the other side of things. You don't necessarily see the problems. And it's not that everyone's nefarious. It's just your company. How do you do a good job for your company and sell more products? Well, you make everybody think they're good. And when you're going to fund your own research and studies, of course, you're going to show them in the best possible light. And that doesn't mean that they're wrong. But at the same time, if you have billions of dollars, trillions of dollars to potentially gain, you're going to show the product in the best possible light with the least possible side effects. And unless somebody outside of that looks at the data independently, goes through things, pushes back, then that's all that we see. And of course, they're going to show. And that's what's happening right now is a lot of our organizations are mostly funded by these companies. And so nobody is really pushing back, and you get a rubber stamp on all these products. Everything gets approved, everything goes through, and it's really hard to even push back. And that is where there was a lot of discussion recently about placebos and placebo discussions about vaccines. And when you really go back and you look at the vaccines on the schedule for kids, very few, almost none, were ever studied before they were hit the market with a true placebo. And the problem is that nobody actually has a discussion about what that word means. Because a placebo, the way that we were taught, the way that I would think is a placebo is an inert substance. Salt water, saline, not supposed to cause any reaction in the body. So when you go look at the trials, they were placebo studied, but the placebo was a vaccine. Placebo was another vaccine. The placebo was a vaccine minus the antigen. So when somebody says, oh, they've all been placebo studied, yes, they have. But the placebo isn't what you think the placebo was. So really those vaccines, Hep B and polio and measles, they were studied against earlier versions of the vaccines. The first studies in general were not against placebos because that, let's say the DTaP vaccine, that was like 100 years ago. So it was like 75. So they didn't study things that way that they maybe took a bunch of siblings, or they took a group of 20 people and just gave them the vaccine and saw if they had more or less symptoms. But they didn't really study them in the safety way that we do now. So DTaP is the greatest example because the original was the DTP, the wholesale. Now we have DTAP, the acellular pertussis. The original vaccine was taken off the market for safety concerns. The new vaccine was studied against the old vaccine. So you take something off for safety, but the new one is safe because it's not any worse than the first one. That doesn't mean that it's safe because you don't have a absolute safety. You're not studying against an inert placebo. And that is what he is talking about. So now we're in a pickle because a lot of these vaccines were never studied the most optimal way originally, but the ethics would say you can't not give kids vaccines, so you can't actually do an inert placebo-controlled trial right now. So we don't have the research which you would ideally want for the best safety data, and you can't really get it. But at least for a new vaccine where there's nothing on the market, there shouldn't be any controversy to say, look, the FDA, the CDC, they never required true placebo testing. Why don't we require that? Any new vaccine where there's nothing on the market, there should be no ethical concern with saying, hey, Pfizer, if you're going to put some new product on the market and give it to my baby, you have to study it against an inert placebo for safety for X amount of months. We're not accepting it unless you do. That's not anti-science. That's literal science. I want the best possible science, safety for my kids. I don't want to give them something that has more risk. Why don't we make them get the best research? No one ever has. So that's not that is what I think he's saying. And
the mRNA vaccines were not placebo.
So they actually were.
They were.
So most of the mRNA actually did it better. They were required to do it. They were pushed back to make them do it. So they weren't, as far as I'm aware, they weren't initially going to do it. And then with the emergency use, they forced them to do it. So they did actually do some placebo. So those were the ones that actually were placebo controlled. The polio, the original polio, actually was. So the big trials, the one with the March of the Dimes, that was actually like the best study we've had. It was millions of people. It wasn't all done blinded and everything, but still very good study. The original polio was actually done with a placebo, but it's not the same polio we use anymore. The new polio that's on the market now wasn't studied like that. So you can say, yes, polio was the original one, but not the one we use now. So it's actually different. It's made differently.
Interesting. So just big picture, do you see the risks of these different categories of vaccines to be different from each other, or are they pretty much in the same bucket of risk to our children?
I don't think we really know. So I think from a short-term perspective, they're pretty similar. I think from a short-term perspective, we have a pretty good understanding because you can study something for a couple weeks and you can see how many fevers somebody gets and how many, even with myocarditis, we picked that up. So I think they're a little different. Each vaccine is going to be a little bit different in terms of their risk profile, but in general, severe risks are probably on the more rare
Yeah.
Like, now we say, oh, it's 1 in a million. I think it's more than 1 in a million, but it's not 1 in 5.
Okay.
It's bigger. But I think the big question that we still have to answer is the long-term risks. And I don't think we have any clue on that. We really don't know. There's really no way at this point to even study that, or it hasn't been done. There's not a good system in place to say, well, if I get a vaccine today, how does it affect me 5 or 10 years from now? Because the trials that are done before are generally going to be short. So they might be a couple weeks, maybe if you're lucky, 6 months to a year, but nothing studying kids for 5 years or 10 years. And the systems that we have in place right now, like VAERS, Vaccine-Adverse Reporting, it's somebody has to report it.
Yeah.
So if you get asthma, you're not saying, oh, my vaccine from 3 years ago was anything to do with that. You're not reporting it. So there's actually no way to know unless you follow kids forward or somebody associated with it, or they do their own study where they're like, you know what, I think vaccines are related to blah, blah, blah. I'm going to study it for 5 years. But that's really not done.
There's certain countries like Denmark, for example, Finland, I think also, they have incredible medical record systems where they track every citizen longitudinally for a long period of time. Have they looked at their data around vaccines?
Very rarely. So vaccinated versus unvaccinated is never done.
Really?
So that's one of another just shocking things that you would think, because even for the autism research, right? Like, I would have thought that this was done.
Yeah.
Like, you would think, just like you said, Denmark, Kaiser, we have the vaccine safety data link. Like, all of these things exist. You could very easily, I did a master's in epidemiology, so I know.
Oh, you did? Okay,
You could fairly easily get that research and look at vaccinated versus unvaccinated kids and look at their rates. It's not been done.
Wow.
So that is very shocking to me, because either people just never thought to do it, or they have looked at it and they don't like what they found, so they didn't publish it, or they were told not to. I don't know. I don't know what the reason is. I don't want to speculate, but it's very weird. When you look at it, you would think that stuff was there, just like with the autism research, when you're told, like, this is just settled. And you're like, well, okay, but where is that research? You would think that would have been done already. And it actually hasn't been done. So the research is not as strong as we're made to believe. And that was very interesting to me going through, based on what I was always taught, wasn't what the actual research shows and what's actually been done, which is very surprising, because I thought I would find different things.
Yeah. It's almost like you're taught in medical school. Everyone is taught this in medical school, that you're almost given this notion that vaccines are the most extensively studied, the best thing ever. I mean, it's just like, it's like not giving a vaccine is like cutting your own arm off. Like, why would you do that?
Right. And that's like a play on words, because they have been studied a lot.
Yeah.
That's the thing. They have been studied a ton, but only in certain ways.
Yeah.
And they haven't been studied in other ways.
Right.
And so I think that especially when you go back in time, we were really worried about infectious disease. So they were studied for reducing disease because it was important, because people were dying. Now, we don't have as much of that, maybe because of vaccines, but mostly because I think we're just healthier. We have better nutrition, better environment, have better healthcare, antibiotics, all sorts of things. So it's a different world now. And doctors, when we were training, we were in the ICU. We might have seen people die of whooping cough. Older doctors would have seen people having horrible meningitis from Haemophilus influenza. But parents don't see that. They see autism, asthma, allergies, all these other things. They see their friend who got a vaccine and they swear, oh, they got a vaccine and they were totally normal, and then they weren't the next day. And that's what they hear. And so there's a lot of skepticism around vaccines, and medicine's not answering those questions. They're just saying, oh, they're safe. And people don't buy that anymore. And that's why trusted medicine is gone, especially after the pandemic.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I see that all the time. So let's talk about some of the long-term risks of vaccines. And maybe you can just kind of run through a laundry list of potential long-term risks that you're concerned about, autism being one of them, I assume.
Yeah, I think literally all of chronic disease is a concern around vaccines and how that could be related. So from a medical standpoint thus far, you wouldn't say so. You would say it's been studied, and there certainly are some studies that show that it's not related, but not all of the studies. There absolutely are some good studies out there that show that there might be links, but it hasn't been studied very extensively because most people just don't do that. But I would say if you are giving more and more vaccines, which are literally built to stimulate your immune system to have an immune response, then it is a biologically plausible thing that some people with certain genetics, it could affect your immune system in a negative way and trigger in a certain person or lead to or be a part of chronic disease, autoimmune conditions, cancer, diabetes, autism, ADHD. Maybe yes, maybe no, but I don't think it's unreasonable to ask those questions. And I would say the thing that I'm most shocked about in all of the research is the autism research.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know what you were taught. I was always taught it's been debunked. It's settled. That's what you hear over and over again. And so when I went to write this book, I had never done the research myself. I don't think most people have.
Right.
Right? You assume the CDC's done all this stuff, right? Yeah. And you're like, okay, if you're so confident, then I guess we're confident. So I thought what I was going to find was, all right, here's this amazing body of research that shows why vaccines are not related to autism. But I've been in this space for a while, and I'm an integrative doctor, so I've obviously heard some of the other things, and I've seen some of the research that's not so great, but there are other things out there that kind of talk about autism, and people are concerned about it. So here's the other side of the discussion, and maybe it's not as definitive as we think, but here's why we say that, and it's still we're pretty confident. But when you look at the research, it just doesn't really exist, and that's insane. Like the main research is on MMR and thimerosal. Thimerosal being the mercury-containing component, which isn't really in the vaccines anymore, but is really just around MMR. And there's almost no other research, and there's no research on vaccinated versus unvaccinated kids. Even in the research that we have, it's vaccinated versus vaccinated kids. So MMR versus kids that don't get MMR in the setting of getting your other vaccines. Or there's like antigen studies. You get this many antigens versus this many antigens, but it's not zero versus some. So you actually haven't gotten the research to be able to definitively say anything. And I'm not saying that they do cause autism. I'm saying we shouldn't be saying, I think, as a profession, that the science is settled or it's been debunked. I don't think we actually know, because kids get a lot more vaccines in the first year than just MMR. And the vast majority of the research is on that one vaccine.
Oh, I see. And so even the MMR vaccine research you're saying is not against the placebo.
It's not against the placebo.
It's not against unvaccinated.
No, so it's mostly retrospective. It's not prospective. So that's the first thing. It's mostly MMR versus no MMR in the setting of your other vaccines. And so it's still good research. I mean, there are some really good epidemiologic studies that have been done, and nothing has shown very definitively that it is related. But to be able to so confidently say, like we do, you would think there'd be randomized trials or prospective trials or vaccinated versus, and just like we're talking about, like they've never taken the vaccine safety data link or Danish Health and said, all right, let's look at all the kids. Here are all the kids that are unvaccinated. Let's look how much autism they have.
Yes.
That could take you 3 minutes to do.
Yes.
But it's never been done. So how can you even say, if you haven't even just looked at the rates and have those studies published? And I thought for sure that was out there. And I did not believe it. When I was looking, I was like, I have to be wrong. I'm missing something. I read Paul Offit's book, Peter Hotez's book. I read all these other books that are super pro-vaccine. I'm like, okay, they must have other research that they're pointing to. And you look at all their references, it's the same ones. So there's this confidence that I think is just not real there.
Is there a percentage of people that have got the vaccine that get autism? I mean, do we at least know that? What percent of people getting the vaccines get autism?
I mean, we don't know that. We know what percentage of people have autism.
Yeah, exactly.
And most of them have gotten vaccines, but most people get vaccines. So only like 1% in total of kids don't get any vaccines based on what we know. So most kids have gotten vaccines. It's not. I can tell you with 100% certainty, autism is not all from vaccines, because I've taken care of kids with autism that have never had a vaccine.
Got it.
So
I think that was my question.
Yeah, it could be something that's related. It could be something that pushes you over the edge. It could be something where you just notice it because it causes some inflammation in the body and it gets worse. Maybe for some kids they have a bad reaction. I don't see why it couldn't ever cause a bad reaction in kids. Of course, they could. See, vaccines are known to cause seizures, they're known to cause encephalitis. That's not woo-woo or out there. That's in the inserts, and people have been paid for it, and it's very well documented that it can happen. Again, it's not super common, but it happens. So to me, it doesn't seem biologically implausible that encephalitis couldn't be more long-lasting or cause some sort of damage, that we could call it autism, especially because autism isn't a thing. It's a diagnosis based on symptoms that we take a picture of, and so it's probably many things.
Exactly, yeah. And I guess that's my question, is like, it seems like there's enough unvaccinated kids out there now that you can get a rate of how many of these unvaccinated kids get autism or not get autism, and just compare that to the...
Anyone that's done that shows it being much lower, but usually the people that do it are very biased. So that's the problem. You haven't really seen very much in a way of an unbiased person who's like, all right, I'm the head of the CDC and I love vaccines and I did this study and it actually showed the opposite of what I thought. Like, it's usually I'm pretty anti-vax, and my research shows something that there's more autism in the vaccinated kids, or I'm the head of CDC safety and it doesn't show any difference. Like, that is a lot of what you see, and I would love to see something going prospectively, or somebody find the opposite of what they're expecting to find. That would be a little bit more believable to me than the other side of things. But what we need is a prospective study, and it could be done. Like, there's no reason why you can't have a unblinded study. Like, it's going to be hard to do a blinded study because you're not going to be able to give people vaccines that don't want them, and you're going to give people, you're not going to want to not give people, but there are enough people that would absolutely volunteer for that study, and there are enough people that don't want to get vaccines that you could still follow them forward. Yeah, there's some confounders and bias, but at least you could follow people forward for the next 10 years, and let's see who gets more autism. Like, I would want to know that. Like, if I'm a doctor, don't you want to know if this vaccine is related to asthma? Because if it is, let's say getting your hepatitis B vaccine at birth gives you 10 times more risk of asthma. I'd want to know that. Then you would say, why?
Yeah.
Why is that happening? Right. And is there an ingredient in there? Is there something that we're doing? Maybe we could change it. Yeah. I'm not trying to not protect you from hepatitis B or measles, but don't we want vaccines that protect you as much as possible while also minimizing your risk? So don't we want to know that? And let's just say you do that study and the risks are exactly the same. That's the research that's going to make people confident to say, all right, well, now I have some good research for 10 years, 1 million kids, there's no difference between vaccinated and unvaccinated and autism. I'm not worried about that anymore. Like, that's what the research should be that we want to make people confident. And if we find that, great. And if we don't, then let's figure out why. Because if it is related, we're not trying to give people autism, or we're not trying to give people autoimmune conditions or anything that's going to negatively impact their life. And we want to know that. And if it's not related, then we want to be able to say that actually definitively through research and science. That's not anti-science. That's literal science.
That is science, right? So it's 2025 right now. We don't have this research. How are you talking to your new moms and dads that are coming into you with their kids about this controversy, this problem? How do you counsel them?
So I counsel them the same way that, I'm talking to you, the same way I'm talking in the book. It's always the same. It's their choice. I try to go through the pros and the cons, what we know and what we don't know, and talk about risk versus benefits. Because ultimately, that's the way that we need to be discussing things and thinking about things. And just like we've been discussing, there's a lot of stuff we don't know, but we don't know what we don't know. So you have to make a decision based on what we do know. And I would say, first off, it would be very arrogant of me to say that I know better than the CDC or something that's been studied for a long time. So I never tell people that they shouldn't get a vaccine or that they shouldn't do what the CDC says. That's the standard of care. Mm-hmm. That's what's been studied. That's what's recommended. Everything outside of that is personal choice. If they feel like, based on what they read or what they see, that they want to go slower, they want to do something different, I'm okay with that. I think that can be reasonable on a patient-specific discussion, and they can make that choice that's right for them. And they just need to understand, okay, what are the risks, right? So if you choose not to get this vaccine, what is the risk that your child's going to get it? What is the risk if they do get it? How serious it's going to be? And I think if you understand that fact, then you've done your job as a doctor. You've informed them, and anything's possible. You don't have a crystal ball, so we don't know. And hepatitis B at birth is, I think, the perfect example of, like, could you get hepatitis B as a baby? Yeah, you could get hepatitis B. But if you have tested the mom and she's hepatitis B negative and dad's hepatitis B negative, then could somebody walk into your house and bleed on your baby? Sure, that's possible. Could they bang into a needle on hepatitis B? Yes, it's possible, but you don't really see that in the research literature. So it's probably 1 in a million, 1 in 100 million that's going to happen. So you have to understand that risk. And could your baby get hepatitis B? Sure, that is possible. But if you choose, you know what, I don't have Hep B, my husband doesn't have Hep B, I understand the test could be wrong, I understand uncle could have hepatitis B and bleed on my baby, then they could still get it. But I'm choosing, I feel like there's some risk from a vaccine, even if it's small, and I don't want that risk, I'll do the hepatitis B vaccine later. That's reasonable to me. If reasonable. Mom has hepatitis B and having a vaginal birth, you probably should get that vaccine. Like, that's a very different risk profile.
It's a very different risk profile.
And that's the way we should talk about things. That's the way I talk about it.
Okay, because I'm glad you talked about hepatitis B, because that was a question of mine, because I really believe there's a lot of choice there. What about the MMR? How do you talk about that one with parents?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the exact same thing. You have to understand what your risk is. Right. And the difference with the MMR, I think, a little bit is the risk to the community. So that also piece has to be discussed. We talked about it a little bit before, but I think that there's something to be discussed. At least it's important to mention, like, there's this community immunity that we're going for. And with MMR, it works really, really well. And also there's an outbreak. So I think that all those things come in, because if there are, polio in contrast, like, you don't want polio, right? But we haven't had polio in a long time. So the risk of you getting polio is basically zero, right? Is it possible that somebody could come in with polio and give your kid polio? Sure. Is it possible you could travel to somewhere where they have polio? Yes, that's possible. But if you have a baby who's a month old and you're staying home, they're not getting polio, right? I mean, unless something really weird happens. So that's a different risk profile than measles, which, if there's an outbreak, anybody could walk by, anybody can be on the plane. There could be an outbreak in your, like, there isn't, let's say, one in LA right now, but tomorrow there could be. So that is a real risk, and you need to understand that. then you need to understand, okay, so what is your risk if you get measles?
Right.
So even if it does happen, is your kid going to die? Probably not, right? And we have a lot of scare tactics around measles. But the reality is it's actually a very low risk for death compared to most diseases. But could you die? Sure. Could you get really sick? Absolutely. You could go to the hospital. You could get pneumonia. It's quite high risk. It's like 1 in 6 of a chance. So it's not a insignificant risk. So you have to be aware of that, because if you are exposed to measles, then there's a chance you're going to the hospital. There's a chance you're getting a bad pneumonia. There's a chance you might need an ICU or antibiotics, and you just need to understand that. But before a vaccine, there were millions of cases of measles and a few hundred deaths.
Yeah.
We have tens of thousands of deaths from the flu every year.
Right.
So death-wise,
yeah,
in general, if you're healthy, it's actually much lower. So it's not a huge risk, but the difference for measles is super contagious.
Yeah.
So if it's around and no one's vaccinated, everybody's getting it.
Yeah.
So one kid out of that 1,000 or whatever is going to get very sick. And so there's that that you need to weigh. But someone might choose, you know what? I understand my kid has a 1 in whatever chance of getting very sick. I'm okay with that. I want to wait.
Yeah.
But if you understand that, then I think that's your right to do, with the caveat of the discussion of public health, which, again, if everybody decides to not do it, your risk increases. So that is something that people have to weigh, because if a lot of people don't do it, your risk changes.
Right, exactly. And let's just head on. You mentioned briefly DTaP real quick. Where do you fall when you talk to your parents about DTaP?
So I would say of the vaccines that you can do in the first, so usually you get it at 2 months old, will be the first time. That's the one people do first in general. So not because of diphtheria, because nobody really gets diphtheria. There's a couple cases in the last 50 years, so it's almost zero. Tetanus, again, so people are very worried about tetanus.
Yeah.
That's a weird one, because actually very few people get tetanus.
Right.
Somebody had a really good smear campaign against rusty nails for whatever reason, which has nothing to do with rust. So I think that's really interesting, because you're always taught like, oh, rusty nail, you step on a nail. You go to the even if you get a bad cut, what do? You go to the hospital. If you get a bad cut, they give you a whooping tetanus shot, which you don't need. Right. It's actually a very weird thing, because you're not getting it from that. So you're getting it from an anaerobic puncture wound, usually. So basically what has to happen is you have to be out somewhere where there actually is tetanus, which is usually on a farm, because it usually comes in the soil, and it's usually from the stool of animals. So that's why the rust part, because usually there's rusty products on a farm because it's outside and they're working. So that's actually how you get it. And you get a puncture wound, you don't clean it properly, it gets closed, and that's when you can get it. But even if you have tetanus, generally the vaccine's not going to be super helpful. Maybe if you catch it really early, it might be helpful. You might get, but usually you have to give the antibodies for it. So actually giving everyone tetanus shot doesn't make a ton of sense when they just have a cut, but that's how it's done.
Right.
But
I did trauma for a long time, and it was always so annoying on the checklist that you like, do they get a tetanus shot or not? You know,
and I think it's more of a protection for like the one person that might get tetanus. But realistically, for you, if you get a cut, you don't actually really need a tetanus shot. I mean, yes, it's possible you could get tetanus, but again, there's only a couple cases every year in all of America. And if you just had a cut outside and it's bleeding, you're probably not going to get tetanus. And even if you do get tetanus, most of the time you're okay. Right. So all those things you need to realize. But yeah, there's a couple of bad tetanus cases every year. And that's something that needs to be explained to the person in the hospital. Like, okay, you have a 1 in a million chance of having a bad tetanus from this. Do you want the tetanus shot? If somebody does, great, go for it. That's totally fine. If you have a horrible cut, do you want to be giving yourself a vaccine to be stimulating your immune system while you're trying to heal? I don't know. That seems weird to be. That seems like you want your body to heal. But I get it. So that's that part of it. So the whooping cough is really why you're doing it. Mm-hmm. Back to the question we kind of veered off there. So the whooping cough is real. Yeah. And if a baby gets it, it's very serious. Half kids that end up in the hospital with whooping cough. If we get whooping cough, it's not fun, but generally not super serious. It could be, but usually you can handle it, just a bad cough for a couple months. But for a baby, it's very serious. They can go apneic, so turn blue, have trouble breathing. And so a lot of them get pneumonia and a lot of them get very sick. So that one you actually don't want, ideally, as a baby. And so and there always is whooping cough out there, but mostly because whooping cough vaccine isn't that good. Yeah. So I think if there's any vaccine we could change, that would be the first one that I would change. You're giving kids 5+ in the first few years, and still they have a reasonable chance to get it because the vaccine wears off so quickly. Right. And so there's still a lot of whooping cough outbreaks because the vaccine doesn't work so well, but it works well in the short term. Right. So it does protect the baby. The best protection probably from antibodies for mom. If mom's protected. One of the most interesting things is cocooning doesn't actually work, which is weird, because I was always taught, you should cocoon, and you should give everybody around the baby the vaccine, and the research doesn't actually show that. I was super surprised when I was doing that research, but so the research started with baboons, actually. And they gave the baboons whooping cough, and then they gave them the old vaccine, the wholesale, and they gave them the new vaccine, and they put them all together and see who could transmit it. And they realized the old one actually did work because it was the wholesale, prevented transmission. But the DTaP does not prevent transmission. If anything, in those studies, you had an increased risk of transmission. They followed those studies up in humans, same thing. So it doesn't actually prevent transmission. So it's a very weird discussion because most of the studies, even from very pro-vaccine individuals, say the research doesn't actually support cocooning in general because you actually might increase your risk to give a baby whooping cough because you think about this. So maybe it'll decrease your symptoms. You might not cough on a baby, but the likelihood for, let's say, a grandparent who's coming to the house, if they're coughing, they're probably going to, you know what, I'm coughing. I'm not going to come over. I'm going to take it safe. But if they have no symptoms and you're preventing them from getting whooping cough symptoms, but they still colonize with it, they're not even going to know they have whooping cough. They're going to give it to the baby if they come over. So there is an argument maybe that it actually increases your risk. So it's really interesting because that is something where it should be discussed because, again, it's not that the vaccine might not help mom or might not give mom antibodies past the baby, but giving to everybody else may not actually be that helpful. And so I think that is a really reasonable study we should follow up on.
Sure.
Does it increase your risk to give it to a baby? Because why are you giving someone a vaccine if it actually makes it less safe?
Right.
Like that's not the point. The point is like you're trying to prevent kids from getting it, but if you can still be colonized and still pass it on, then you're actually just masking the symptoms which you would have to tell you that you have whooping cough so you don't go see the baby. So it's an interesting discussion around TDAP, but it does work for the baby. It does work. It works quite well.
Wow. And then, lastly, just to touch on this, and this is probably the most controversial, is the mRNA vaccines that we're giving our kids for COVID. And I think they were pretty much universally useless when we forced all of our kids to get, the multiple shots during the epidemic. And where do you kind of land on that right now?
Yeah, I think the research is extremely biased on both sides there. From what I have seen thus far, even from the most recent research, it still does help you a little bit in theory. So it does, if you just get it, seem to decrease your chance to get it a little bit and decrease the severity. But the severity is already so low in general that for me at least, I don't feel like the benefits outweigh the risks. And really the whole rest of the world doesn't offer it to kids, and we've had coronavirus forever, and mostly it's just a cold. And in general, unless something changes with a new version of coronavirus, you don't need to be vaccinated against every single cold because there's risks, and there's unknown long-term risks. We certainly have the myocarditis risk, and all the other things which are speculated around the vaccine. And so to me, you need enough of a benefit to give a child another few vaccines, especially because we already have so many. And at least thus far, and I think things are moving that way in general, that for a healthy child, there's not a huge benefit. It is there, and I think that's where the fun. Like you can look at the studies and say, okay, the kids have a less chance to. It does decrease the risk a little bit, and that's fair. But the absolute risk is quite small. And to me, to give kids an unknown vaccine with an unknown safety profile, especially long term, for something where 99.99% of the kids are going to be just fine. Most of them have already had it, unless they're just really young.
Right.
The benefits don't outweigh the risks for me, and I think the public agrees because almost no one did it, even when it was still recommended. And I think most people just have decided that they don't feel like the benefits are there, and they would rather risk it with getting COVID. And they could be right, they could be wrong, but I think that's where people have landed, and that's where the world has landed, except for America. And now we're kind of fighting. So I'm not sure what the recommendations technically are because there's like 16 different recommendations.
Exactly.
They change every day.
They do. Yeah. And so, my kids still got COVID despite getting the vaccine anyway. And and they still got sick, and they still, they were fine in a few days. And I agree. Like I think most of the public has decided that the benefits do not outweigh the risks of the vaccine, specifically because so many people in my purview from, we have a clinic here that we're trying to help people with health, right? And a lot of people have been coming in with long COVID type of symptoms after getting the COVID and after getting the vaccine. I've seen both. And so it's really concerning to me, specifically around myocarditis, autonomic dysregulation, and exposing our kids to this unnecessarily.
Yeah, I think so. And I mean, there is a lot of concern around the vaccine. There are a lot of reports of issues. Some of them probably have nothing to do with the vaccine, but at least based on when you look at VAERS data or other data, there are just so many reports, more than all their vaccines together. And that may not be totally true. Maybe it's only a portion of that that's actually related to the vaccine, but it's still a lot more than, even if it was 1% of the people that reported death or serious complications from the vaccine. That's still a lot more cases than we pulled the rotavirus vaccine off or the DTP vaccine off. It's such a weird dichotomy, I think, because there's a lot of politics around this vaccine and it's new, that we have a lot of concern. Whether it's true or not, I'm not 100% sure because we haven't got the appropriate research in the debates. But there's enough concern around it that we should not just be wholeheartedly pushing this forward. We should be discussing it. Yeah. And at least at a minimum, you can be recommended but not required. It should never be required.
Yeah. How do you fall on the yearly flu shot? For children specifically.
So the flu shot's very interesting because, one, it depends on the year. Some years it's really, really not that helpful, and other years it can be a little bit more helpful. The research is very varied on the flu shot. People are very split. About 50% of people get the flu shot now, so it's been going down and down and down. There was this crazy Cleveland Clinic study from this last year, I don't know if you saw it, where the individuals and it was a very good study, so you can't say it's anti-science or from people that are non-science. They gave them the flu shots. The people that got the flu shots had higher risk of getting the flu by a lot, by like 30%. So it was a massive increase on a very good study amongst healthy people. And you have to sit here and say, okay, there are some other studies in the past, not many, but that show that if you get a vaccine, it can increase your risk of getting other infections. And so the question is this real? Is that real? Maybe that's specific, that study. Maybe they didn't do something right. Maybe it's biased in whatever way. But if people are getting an increased risk of getting the flu from the flu shot, we need to repeat that to figure out if that's true and then figure out why. How do we make a flu shot that actually works and prevents you from getting sick? So in general, it's supposed to decrease your risk by somewhere between 10 and 50 to 60%. Usually when you get it, it does decrease your risk of serious disease. I think that's pretty well established. Again, at what cost? Should you get it every year? There's research and concern that if you keep getting it every year, it decreases the efficacy over time. Maybe it increases your risk for other infections. That's not totally proven, but there's discussion around it. But this Cleveland Clinic study from last year, that's a big one. That needs to be repeated because if that is true, again, do you want to give a flu shot and increase someone's risk? Of course you don't. I want to give you a vaccine if it helps you. If it protects you, it doesn't cause you an issue. So I think there's a lot swirling around that vaccine right now, and we're going to need some better research to really see where things go because it changes every year, we're guessing. And if you're giving somebody a vaccine every single year, there are risks with everything. And you want it to have a benefit for you. And I'm not saying it doesn't have a benefit, but where is the risk versus benefits is really the question we should be asking. Because just because you can vaccinate doesn't mean you should. And just because we can create a vaccine for something doesn't mean we should.
Right.
There is an upper limit to everything that's good. And the question is, are we already there? Are we past that? Yeah. How many vaccines is too many? Because even if you have, let's just take medicine's numbers of 1 in a million severe risk. Fine, but 1 in a million times 1 in a million times 1, if you're getting lots of vaccines, if you're getting 50, 70 vaccines, that number adds up real quick, and now you have 1 in 100,000 or 1 in 10,000 severe risk. It's very different when these diseases are not around as much anymore. And no one's thinking about compounding risk.
Yes.
And that matters.
Yeah, absolutely.
You're doing so many.
Do you think that there's, vaccine obviously saved millions of humans 100 years ago, but now that a lot of these diseases have been completely eradicated, like polio, do you think that vaccines time there was a time for vaccines back when medicine wasn't as advanced as it was, right? And public health wasn't as advanced as it is now. And just awareness was not there. And do you think that, the vaccine served its time in history, and now we need to have a different view of how much we actually need to make vaccines part of public health?
That's such a good question. So the first part of the answer is it depends on how much is related to chronic disease. Because if at the end of the day of the research, we find that it is related to some of these things like autism and chronic disease, I think that changes the equation a lot. If it's not related to those things, then you're still protecting people from diseases. I think we probably need to reevaluate which diseases we are protecting ourselves for and maybe prioritize the most important ones. I think that we are much healthier in general, so we don't necessarily need all of them. But I think if you did get rid of some of them, then things would start to come back. So I think that is really, really important. But I think at the end of the day, we have to have these kind of nuanced conversations to really think about where we're going with the program, because we really actually just don't know. Like we assume that vaccines have done so much and have decreased a lot of these diseases. But if you look at most of the diseases, the death rate was almost negligible before the vaccines came out. And the way that you can really think about it is something like tuberculosis, right? There was tons of deaths of tuberculosis hundreds of years ago. And now there's almost zero. And if we had to come out with a tuberculosis vaccine 75 years ago, we would say, oh, the tuberculosis vaccine has made this zero. And rheumatic fever. We had the rheumatic fever vaccine, then made it almost zero. But now or cholera or dysentery, all these things that we don't see anymore that have nothing to do with vaccines because we're not getting a vaccine for it. So if we never got let's say, a Haemophilus vaccine, would that have gone down on its own? The graphs on that one, maybe not, but like maybe some of these other ones, like I don't know. I don't know the answer. We don't know. But maybe these diseases would be almost zero anyways, even if we didn't get rid. Maybe that's polio, right? Maybe polio is just gone because we're healthier and not necessarily because of the polio vaccine, even though that might have helped. It might have helped it go down more, might have done a better job. Maybe that would be gone anyways, because that is true of some of these other diseases which we don't have vaccines for, or maybe not. Maybe we'd have a lot of measles. I don't know. I don't know what the answer is, but I think that it's a reasonable question that we don't totally have an answer to. But I think we can at least be confident that we don't live where we used to live. And I think, let's just say, for example, if the measles vaccine factories all got destroyed today, not everybody would be dying of measles, because 500 people, 400 people were dying of measles before the vaccine ever hit the market, and we're much healthier today in general than we were then. So yeah, you might see 50 deaths or 100 deaths. It might have more cases, but I don't think we're going to go back to the Stone Ages where everyone's just dying of all these diseases. I don't think that's true, because it's not true of the diseases we don't have vaccines for.
That's a really, really good point. And unfortunately, the reason all these studies are not being done is because the way our Western medical system is designed is the financial incentives is to have more vaccines out there, right?
Correct.
The more and more makes more and more money because more and more people have to buy these things.
The studying is actually the company. So they don't. Yeah. So think about this. If you are a company and you have a vaccine on the market and everyone's basically got to take it because it's on the schedule, why would you do a study for billions of dollars, to look for problems, to find the problem, to pull your product off the market? You're not going to do that. Of course you're not going to do it. That's not like the evil. Why would they do it? We have to do it. The CDC has to do it. The NIH has to do it. Somebody outside has to say, we want to make sure that these things are as safe as the company is telling us that it is, because we're injecting it into our kids. We have this and this concern. Let's study it. No one's doing that unless you're some researcher that wants to lose your career because you want to find a problem with a vaccine. Then you're going to say, oh, you're an anti-vax crazy person. And they're going to throw out that research. So we don't have any of that. And nobody was pushing back. Not until now. Now we are seeing a little bit more of that. There is a little bit more interest, it seems, because of Secretary Kennedy being there, and he has his opinions. And again, you can agree with them or not agree with them, but I think you will start to see a little bit of more of a push to open up the research to letting people study it if they have those questions and concerns. And we will see where that goes, because it will be really interesting to see research from people that have a little bit less bias, that are open to doing some of these studies and actually seeing where I don't know. I don't know what we're going to find. I, again, go back to, it's really easy to do this research. They had these huge databases before. I can't imagine nobody ever plugged those numbers in and looked. And I wonder if they looked and didn't like what they found. That's the only thing I can think of. I don't know. That's speculation, but I don't know why it was never done before. I would think if you have someone like Kennedy who's coming up the wings, the first thing you would do is say, hey, look, we looked at Denmark at 100 million people. We looked at vaccinated versus unvaccinated kids over the last 50 years. And look, there's no difference. Front page of New York Times.
Exactly.
It would be there. So I would think they would have done that and couldn't find it. But maybe just no one did it. Maybe they just weren't looking because they were very convinced that vaccines wouldn't have anything to do with this. So just nobody did those studies. I don't know.
So interesting. And I really applaud you for bringing all these questions out into the forefront, because you're not saying you have the answers. You're just saying we just have not asked the questions for such a long time.
I don't think so. I couldn't find it if we did.
And we're in a moment of history now that people are questioning, and these are the big questions, and there are ways to answer these questions. So hopefully we're at a time now that we can get these questions answered just once and for all, right?
I think so. That's what I want. I go back to, I don't care if kids get 0 vaccines or 1,000 vaccines. I want them to be healthy. And the way to get there is to follow the research and the science, and not to assume something, but to ask the right questions and be open to those questions and to listen to parents. When the same story keeps coming up thousands and hundreds of thousands of times from moms and parents, and they went in to get a vaccine and they had a very serious reaction, or what they think is a serious reaction, and that same story happens over and over again. Those are not anti-vaccine parents. That is a literal parent, a literal mom, who took their kid in to get a vaccine, and they feel like they had a bad reaction. They could be right, they could be wrong, could have to do with the vaccine, it could not. But that is data.
Yeah.
That is the data we have to follow. We have to listen and follow that up to see whether it's true or not. And we haven't done that yet.
Yeah, absolutely. And then we should stop blindly following recommendations that are not based on science as well. I think having the questions for your pediatrician is really important as well. Just to hit on a few other topics, as a parent, I'm going to be selfish and monopolize a little bit more of your time and just talk to you about a few things that are top concern to me, I would say. One of the things that we've really tried to eliminate is ultra-processed food in our children's diet and high levels of sugar intake. And I feel that, unfortunately, all the marketing is geared against us. And how do you advise parents on food intake in children?
Yeah, that's another wonderful point, and probably one of the most important things in our health. We spend so much time talking about vaccines, and we have for so long over the last few years. And where really our health comes from, it's not from the pill, it's not from the syringe, it's from the food, it's from our life, it's from what we do. And we failed so much during COVID and even during measles about focusing back on some of these things. Like, a vaccine can do what it does, but ultimately, you want to be healthy, you want to decrease your risk of have a reaction, you want to decrease your risk of getting sick, you need to eat healthy food. Healthy food being real food. We have such a problem in our community, in our society right now, where everything's ultra-processed, everything's packaged, everything's sprayed in all sorts of crap, and you're not really getting nutrient-dense food unless you go to the farm, your farmer, you go to the farmer's market. Like, you're not supposed to eat something that's 3 weeks old. You're supposed to eat something that's freshly picked, that's in really good soil, and we don't have a lot of access to that. So I think our kids are nutrient deficient and they're full with toxins, and that's why everybody's so sick. And ultimately, if you want to get back to having healthy kids and we want to move things in a different direction at the individual level, you got to read labels, you got to get more fresh food, we have to cook more, cook as a family, and know your sources and try to get the best possible sources within your budget. It doesn't have to be super expensive, but I think that's where you want to focus your attention of getting the best quality proteins and fats and fruits and vegetables that you can, and trying to cook as much as we can so you know exactly what's going in there. And I think if we do that, we're going to get a long way. And that to me is really the key to turning things around. There is stuff we have to do at a policy level too, because it's really unfortunate that it's really easy to get the crappy food. We've been marketed to that for so long. It's cheaper. Not everybody has access to it. It could be real expensive for some people to get, or they don't even have ability. So that has to change at the policy level, so that way everybody has access to a fresh garden and farms become more plentiful in inner cities and everything like that. That has to happen too, but that's going to take time. What needs to happen first is everyone needs to be aware that what they eat actually matters.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I actually did a video on this once that comparing a breakfast of cereal and, toasted waffles and syrup and to just eating eggs and vegetables in the morning, the price is actually cheaper for a few eggs and vegetables, than some of the cereals can be really expensive now. And I think people just need to go out there and make a commitment to trying to first find the healthy version of whatever meal they have for their children. And then you can figure out the pricing once you actually made that commitment, because I think people will be surprised that they can actually find it does fit within their budget.
You definitely can. Not for everything. I mean, it can be tough, but again,
not for everything.
But at least to me, like sometimes I get yelled at for being ableist or whatever when I talk about this stuff or whatever words people want to say. And it's like, look, my job as a doctor, as a pediatrician, why I got into this is to help kids. It's to talk about what we should be doing. It's not to talk about money. Some things cost money. That's true. But the goal should be to make it available for everybody. Everybody deserves healthy food. And if it is more expensive, well, that is a problem. Then we need to fix that. We need to make it available. We need to make it cheaper. You don't tell people what to do to create health problems. You're trying to discuss what's going to make people healthier. And if the problem is this isn't accessible or it's more expensive, okay, then we have to lobby to get it more available. We have to change the tax incentives. We have to change the mass production. I mean, it's not easy, but that should be the goal. And it's not about, you can't afford this. No, I understand. That's the problem. Like, we've made it so easy to get this crappy food, and it's harder to get some of this this healthier food. It's not impossible, but it's harder. And so we have to change that. And we can do that if we make that a priority over the next 10 years and focus back on real food and fruits and vegetables and legumes and beans and proteins and fish, all these things, and from the best possible sources, but not just these prepackaged, cheaper foods that have been incentivized for decades.
Right.
And that our parents And when we were younger, like that's what we're eating. We're eating TV dinners and fast food and all these things because it's like, oh, this is great. And now even that food is way worse than it even was back then because now there are just so many ingredients in it. And so we have to have this movement back. And I think a lot of our health issues stem from the crappy food. Then it's mixed with all the toxins. Then it's mixed with the fact that we don't have to move anymore and our cities aren't built for moving. So everything's stacked against us. And then you're like, oh, stay inside. We need sunlight. Like we had COVID. What do? We did all the opposite of all the things that create health. Stay inside. Eat, be stressed.
Right.
More, like that is not what keeps you healthy. So we have to focus back, like, okay, go get your shots if that's what you want to do. But like that's not what's going to get you healthy. What's going to make you healthy is going to be eating fresh food and doing all these other lifestyle factors. And it's so stacked against people right now. And we have to now work over the next decade to stack it back in people's favor to make it more likely they're going to be healthy. Because you look at the blue zones and all the places, they're not doing anything magical. You look at the grandmothers who are like 95 years old and they're stronger than me because they're just in the kitchen rolling all day and working. And that's all they do. They just walk and they farm. And that their just life is set up around that. And our life is set up to be the opposite of that. And we just have to change that again.
Absolutely, yeah. And you see it affecting our children for sure, especially with, the prevalence of devices and gaming where there's less activity, there's much more sedentary behavior, there's less sleep. Kids are playing these games late into the night because of the dopamine hits. And so all of these things are really affecting their health, even, not worse than our generation, right? Like
So
you're
much
younger
worse.
than I am. It just keeps getting worse and worse.
Yeah, I don't think TV is the problem. We all watch
No.
TV, but now the average kid's watching 7 to 9 hours of screens in their
Right.
teen years. That is not the same thing as watching 30 minutes of an educational program. Like you can
Absolutely.
learn something from Sesame Street or whatever. There's lots of research on that. You don't learn as well from a TV as you do from people, but I'm not worried about 30 minutes. I'm worried about 7 hours. You're sitting there, you're not outside, you're not in nature, you're not around people. That's a big problem.
Right. So I'm part of a community, thank goodness, where we're all trying to raise our kids as healthy as possible, keep them outside, eating the right foods. And then the topics always come up of like, us adults are doing some things for our health. How does that translate to our children? And I'll give you a few examples. One is the idea of supplementation. Are there supplements that we should be thinking about for our children or not? I mean, obviously we want to get everything from food, but in this world where we live in where food that is nutrient dense is really difficult to find, even if you go to a farmer's market, our food is not as nutrient dense as it used to be. Is there a role for supplementation in children?
Yeah, I mean, that's a beautiful question. And you framed it perfectly, right? Because ideally, no, right? Ideally, we're supposed to be getting all of our nutrients from food, but we're just not.
Yeah.
So I think it is reasonable to do it, especially if you have a picky eater. I don't think you have to go too hardcore with it or really think through it too much. I mean, a good multivitamin can be fine. There's lots of good research on vitamin D. Everyone seems to be deficient. Get more sunlight. That's the better way, but not everyone lives somewhere where you can or you're just not.
Yeah.
So I think if you're thinking about the biggest bang for your buck is going to be multivitamin, probably an omega or fish oil, and vitamin D. And does everybody need to do that? No. Do you need to do it forever? No. Can you get it from food? Sure. But I think a lot of people aren't. So if you're thinking about things, I think those are reasonable. There's not a ton of research on kids. Most stuff is on adults, so it's hard to know. But I think just common sense and kind of extrapolating, those are the big ones, and pretty much everybody agrees on that.
Yeah.
So I think that's totally fine if you want to give your kids some of those in a rotating basis. Seems reasonable to me.
Yeah, and I think it's really important on that. If you are going to give your kids that, make sure they're high quality. There's a lot of junk out there on the supermarket shelves. Avoid gummies that are high in sugar.
Yep.
I know they seem like it's easier for the kids to take them, but a lot of them don't even have the substance in it that they say they're going to have. So I think using apps like Supco is a really good app that tells you, the quality of the supplement that you're giving people and avoiding certain forms of supplements like gummies that are high in sugar. There's some gummies that don't have sugar either. I think that's an important point to make as well.
And I'll say with the gummies, I mean, generally if you're turning something into a gummy, you're losing.
Yes.
You're losing, right? You're losing the quality to make it a gummy. But on the flip side, with kids, it's hard to get stuff in. So for some gummies, if that's the only thing you get into your kids and that's how you're going to get their nutrients in, that's probably better than nothing. But again, like look at the sugar because that's, I think, the big thing and try to minimize the added sugar. Ideally, like a liquid or a powder is going to be better for kids. But sometimes you have really picky kids that can't get it. So gummy is your only option. But I would say the gummy is the last option. Ideally in terms of quality.
Absolutely. Let's talk about the picky eater. I have a lot of friends with kids that are picky eaters and all they want to eat is fried chicken strips and French fries, and that's the only meal they'll have, right? And what's your advice to these parents for trying to get, besides taking supplements, how do we get these kids to start eating better quality food?
The first thing with all the research shows is you got to keep introducing them. So it's not a one-time thing. They say they don't like it in their 3, but then maybe when they're 4 or 5, they will. So keep introducing it. Try to involve them. Take them with you if you're going shopping. So really good, especially as they get older, is bring them with you. Have them pick things out. They're more likely, if they're involved, to eat it. If you have a farmer's market around, that's always a great option, especially for the place where they let you try things. Because kid might not like apples, but if they try 10 different apples, maybe they're going to like one kind. So if you can do that, you can make it a game, like eating different colors. Sometimes you can sneak things in, but ultimately you just have to keep offering things until they'll eat it. And I think something that's really important for a lot of parents is you have to have some humility and say, maybe I'm not the best chef, because a lot of things sometimes can taste very different depending on how you're cooking it. And a lot of us were never taught about cooking. Like a lot of things were fast food, and we have to recognize sometimes like we have a lot of good options out there of learning. Like maybe you got to go back and see what you're doing or what you're choosing and how you're preparing it. Because sometimes preparing in a different way, they'll be much more willing to eat it, or even the quality of the food you're getting. Like you can, I've seen it before. Like you put one version of something or a different version that's a better quality or more fresh, and they're willing to eat it. Like you go berry picking or something. Maybe they don't like berries, but right off the tree, they'll eat it. So maybe it's also the quality. So there are different ways you got to think through how you can finagle things a little bit to get them in. And once they start eating it, then they do. And you don't have to go from one food to 50, but if you can go from one food to 2 and 3, like you just keep increasing over time and keep offering and keep trying, and whatever you got to do to get them to eat a little bit more can be helpful. But it's not impossible. I think it's making it a little bit of a game, and including them can be really helpful. Even a garden, if you have that option, if they can appreciate food a little bit more. If you don't have it, go to a farm and take them to see it. But if you can grow anything, I think that helps kids to see just how difficult it is and what goes into it, and they appreciate it a little more.
Yeah, I totally agree. And also, like you mentioned quickly earlier, you said, talking to them about why it's important to make a healthy choice versus a not healthy choice. I think we sometimes try to force things on our kid, and that almost has a reverse effect where they don't want to be forced to eat something that they don't want. And there's, in childhood, one of the kind of main, I would say in childhood, what happens is children are always pushing back on their parents, right? They're testing the limits all the time. And food is definitely one of them, one of those categories that are going to push back. So what has worked really well for my children is to involve them in the discussions about the why. And then they get it. And then they're like, okay, I'll give it a try.
Yeah, people don't think that sometimes kids will understand this stuff. And obviously it has to be at their level. But you can understand, even little kids, like, okay, this doesn't make you feel good. This can make you sick. This is going to make you stronger. Like whatever words work for them. But you start to build that in from day one. And the one thing I forgot that I think is super important is you have to do it too. Like you have to practice what you preach. You cannot expect them to not eat the Oreo. If you're eating it, it has to not be there. Like you can't do it. You can't tell them, oh, you must eat your veggies and then not do it. Like you also have to be eating, and it has to be a family thing. You have to show them that you're willing to do it too, and it's not gross, or it's not the other thing is not the good thing. Like this is part of your meal. This is how we eat. This is what we're doing. Get rid of the crap out of your house, and the palates will start to change if that's just what we're doing. And you have to parent. Like this is a parenting thing sometimes where they might not be happy with you for a couple of days, especially if they're older kids. If you've had all these snacks in your house and now you're deciding not to do it, they're not going to be happy with you. You have to get past that. You got to be like, look, this is a parenting thing, and I'm sorry, but we're not going to have this in our house anymore. I'm not going to buy it. You can have your snacks and your treats when you're at a party. I'm not, not saying you can never eat a cookie again, but we're not having this in our house anymore. I'm not buying it anymore. We're going to buy these things. You can come with me. We can pick other versions. We're going to look at the labels, and we're going to pick, better versions of chips. It doesn't have to be broccoli, but there are better versions of things, and if that's what's available, then they will start to eat that. But it will take a couple weeks to transition, but they'll do it.
Yeah, that is such a good point. As a parent, you have to practice what you preach. You have to first learn yourself how to eat healthy, start eating healthy yourself, and then bring your children into the conversation.
Correct.
Super important. Last question, which is a Pandora's box, but I'm going to do it.
Do it.
Screen time. Let's talk about screen time. I have an 8-year-old, an 11-year-old. There seems to be a draw to the iPad that is... it's like the tractor beam in Star Trek, like it just keeps drawing them in and pulling them in. How do we manage this as parents?
Yeah, it's a big concern amongst parents. I think that the screens are the screens. They're not going anywhere. It's not going to change. They're not the evil, horrible thing. It's not going to. They're they're there. And so we have to minimize using it, I think, as much as possible. You need to have other things to do, make sure they're on the screens for educational purposes, and try to minimize it as much as you can. I, as a pediatrician, am not worried about the kid watching it in the car or on the trip or for 20 minutes. I'm worried about the kids that are watching it for 7 to 9 hours, and it's increasing every day. So make sure you're not doing it instead of parenting, plopping them in front of the TV for 3 hours, letting them do this for multiple hours a day, and it's slowly increasing. Like, watch that creep, because it does creep. Like, it starts at 5 minutes, then it ends up being 3 hours.
Yeah.
And I think if you can, again, it's like back to parenting. Like, okay, you've been on that for 30 minutes, like that's enough, or you set a limit for the day, or whatever it is. I'm not personally totally against screens, because I don't think they're going anywhere. I think you're gonna need it for school and for other items. So that doesn't bother me as much as how much we're getting. So I think pushing it back to as minimal as possible. The younger kids don't really need it, but still, again, it's there. And I don't think it's the biggest of issues for kids to be on it a little bit, but don't let it get to be hours at a time.
Yeah. Besides time, though, do you feel like there's different levels of harm, different type of content displaying? Like, to me, there seems to be, watching a show on TV versus watching a show that's engineered to keep them addicted and get their brain revved up, versus watching YouTube shorts. And then the next level is playing a game, and then playing a game that's like massive amounts of dopamine hits constantly.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's the point. It's like, what are they watching? What are they exposed to? There's such a wide range of what it is. And again, if you notice it being more and more, like, look at what they're watching. How is that going? Is it that dopamine hit at the crappy TV shows that are just trying to keep them there? Or is it something that's trying to teach them something? Because there is, again, we talked about this a little bit, but there's a lot of research on something like Sesame Street from before. They haven't done a lot of this research recently, but the research on Sesame Street is pretty good. Like, you definitely learn things, and they show a positive in terms of your IQ and other things. So yes, you can learn things from programs if they're good programs, if they're trying to teach you things. So I don't have an issue with that. It's just those things that kind of make you zone out, don't teach you anything, or just trying to keep you online, watch a video game, watch somebody else playing a video game. I mean, we're going in the wrong direction for what people are watching.
There's a show out there that they showed research that the people putting this cartoon out there actually did research on how quickly you need to change the colors and the scene.
Oh yeah, that's probably Cocomelon. And
yeah, Cocomelon. That was the one, right?
Yeah, that's why it's #1 on YouTube, right?
Right,
they know what it's. I imagine they hired the same people that worked in cigarettes that then moved to the food. Wow. I don't have any idea who it was, but what should you do if you're a company trying to put out a program like that? Figure out how to keep people watching it. Like, that's how you make your money. That's how you make your money on YouTube. They've done a great job. They're like #1 on Netflix and #1 on YouTube, right? Wow. Because they know how to keep people engaged. And whatever they're doing, I don't know what it is, but it draws kids in, and what do parents need? They need a break. So it's easy to put them in front of that show. If that keeps them happy for 30 minutes, that's great for the parents. And they've cracked the code based on research and science and whatever they've done. So I think that's important to understand, just that this extends to everything. I mean, your podcast name extends to everything, right? It's literally
exactly
the extension of this research of trying to get you to zone out, to tune in, to make you the product.
Right.
And I think that is just key to know. It doesn't demonize all screens, but that is happening more and more, because what the product is you and your screen time, and it's hard to keep people engaged to something. So that's what they're trying to do.
Yeah, they're trying to engineer the engagement through dopamine, engineering your dopamine reaction.
It's working. Exactly. I mean, that's why it's #1.
Absolutely. Well, wow, I've learned so much from you today. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. And, if people are curious about vaccines, the book Between a Shot and a Hard Place by Dr. Joe Warsh is out, and as of a couple months ago, right? And it's getting a lot of positive, I would say, attention. A lot of people are talking about it, is bringing these questions to the forefront. So thank you for doing this. How can more people learn more from you?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me here. Yeah. Thank you for everything that you're doing. You can find me on Instagram, X, at Dr. Joel Gator, or Between a Shot and a Hard Place, Amazon, everywhere that books are sold, or theshotbook.com.
Fantastic. What's next for you, Dr. Gator?
I don't know. I mean, I've been working on, the vaccine stuff was the last year, and I'm sure there's a lot more of this to do, because I said, I want to do this to get this discussion out there, and people are starting to do it, which is nice. I want to keep doing shows and podcasts and have these discussions, and I've really been trying to get more into advocacy, and so I've been working on that, and hopefully I'm going to continue to work towards policy and food policy and kids' health and school lunches, and that's what I've been doing lately, so hopefully more of that.
Right. Fantastic. Well, we really thank you for all your work you're putting out there and look forward to having you again on here sometime.
Thank you.
Thank you.